A guy spilled his drink on me and said, "Buy better clothes, peasant," at a rooftop party. Then he showed up to his Monday job interview where I was the hiring manager. The Friday evening rooftop party was supposed to be relaxing after a brutal week of back-to-back interviews for our senior developer position. My company, NextForge Solutions, had been hunting for the right candidate for 3 months, and I'd personally screened 47 applicants without finding anyone who fit our team culture. I stood near the railing nursing a gin and tonic, watching the city lights flicker below while my friend Caitlin talked about her latest dating disaster. The venue was packed with tech industry people, startups mixing with established companies, everyone trying to network without looking like they were networking. I wore my usual off-duty outfit, faded jeans and a plain gray Henley that had seen better days, comfortable clothes that let me blend into the background after spending all week in business casual. A group of loud voices erupted near the bar, and I glanced over to see 5 guys in expensive suits laughing too hard at jokes that probably weren't funny. The tallest one, maybe 6'3" with perfectly styled blonde hair and a watch that cost more than my car payment, was holding court like he owned the place. His voice carried across the rooftop as he described closing some massive deal, gesturing with his drink and clearly trying to impress everyone within earshot. Caitlin rolled her eyes and said something about finance bros always being the loudest people at any party, and I agreed while checking my phone for the 100th time that evening. Monday morning would bring 3 final interviews for the developer position, and I'd been reviewing resumes all week trying to find red flags I might have missed. The tall guy from the bar started moving through the crowd, his entourage following like pilot fish around a shark, and I shifted position to avoid their path. But rooftop parties have limited space, and he was heading straight toward the railing where Caitlin and I stood. His group surrounded us before I could suggest moving, their conversation so loud it drowned out the ambient music. The tall guy was still talking about his deal, mentioning figures that seemed inflated and dropping names that were probably meant to impress. Caitlin tried to continue our conversation, but gave up when one of his friends literally stepped between us to get a better view of the city. I backed up against the railing to give them space, but the tall guy turned suddenly with his drink held loosely in one hand, and the entire contents of his whiskey sour splashed across my chest. The cold liquid soaked through my Henley immediately, ice cubes bouncing off my stomach before hitting the ground. For a moment, everyone in the immediate vicinity went quiet, and I looked down at my ruined shirt, then back up at him. He stared at me like I'd materialized out of nowhere, his face showing annoyance rather than apology, and I waited for the automatic sorry that should follow accidentally dumping a drink on someone. Instead, he looked me up and down with obvious disdain, taking in my wet discount clothing and unimpressive appearance. His friends were watching now, sensing entertainment, and he played to the audience. He said in a voice loud enough for half the rooftop to hear that maybe I should buy better clothes if I wanted to hang out at places like this. The word peasant came out of his mouth with such casual cruelty that I actually wondered if I'd misheard him. Caitlin's face went from shocked to furious in seconds, but I put a hand on her arm before she could tear into him. The tall guy's friends started laughing, one of them making a comment about the dress code being pretty relaxed these days. He pulled a money clip from his pocket, peeled off a $20 bill, and tried to hand it to me while suggesting I use it to upgrade my wardrobe. The humiliation was clearly intentional, designed to establish hierarchy in front of his audience, and I could feel every eye on the rooftop focused on our interaction. I didn't take the money, just stood there dripping whiskey and wondering what kind of person acts like this. He let the bill flutter to the ground between us, said something about some people not knowing how to accept help, and turned back to his friends like I'd ceased to exist. They moved away, still laughing, and Caitlin immediately started asking if I was okay while pulling napkins from her purse. I wiped off what I could, but the shirt was ruined, and the smell of whiskey clung to me like cologne. We left shortly after because I couldn't stand being there in soaked clothes while that guy held court on the other side of the roof. Caitlin spent the entire ride home ranting about entitled rich guys who think money excuses terrible behavior, and I mostly agreed while trying not to let the incident ruin my weekend. But something about the casual cruelty bothered me more than it should have. I'd dealt with difficult people my entire career, but there was something particularly degrading about being called a peasant in front of a crowd. Saturday and Sunday passed in a blur of interview prep and trying to forget Friday night. I reviewed candidate portfolios, prepared technical questions, and coordinated with my team about Monday's schedule. We had 3 finalists coming in, all with impressive credentials on paper, and I needed to determine which one would actually fit our collaborative environment. Sunday evening, I laid out my interview clothes and reviewed notes one final time before trying to sleep. Monday morning arrived with rain that matched my mood, and I grabbed coffee on the way to the office while mentally preparing for a long day of assessments. Our first candidate was scheduled for 9 o'clock, a developer from Chicago with an impressive portfolio of mobile applications. I settled into the conference room with my team, Jordan from QA and Leslie from product management, both excellent at reading people beyond their technical skills. We reviewed the candidate's resume one more time, noting his 3 years at a major fintech company and his recent work on payment processing systems. The receptionist called at 9 sharp to say our candidate had arrived, and I told her to send him to the conference room. The door opened 30 seconds later, and the tall guy from Friday night walked in wearing a charcoal suit and a confident smile. Our eyes met simultaneously, and I watched his expression cycle through confusion, recognition, and barely concealed horror in the span of 2 seconds. His name was Colton Hastings, according to the resume in front of me, and he recovered his composure faster than I expected. He extended his hand for a professional shake like Friday night had never happened, his smile now slightly forced, but still present. I shook his hand and introduced myself as the senior hiring manager, watching his face carefully for any acknowledgement of our previous encounter. He gave nothing away, settling into his chair and thanking us for the opportunity to interview today. Jordan and Leslie had no idea about the rooftop incident, and I decided to let the interview proceed normally, despite the awkward recognition hanging in the air. Colton launched into his prepared introduction, talking about his experience at Meridian Financial and his passion for creating elegant code solutions. His answers to our initial questions were polished and professional, clearly rehearsed, but delivered well. He described his role in developing a payment processing app that handled millions of transactions, emphasizing his leadership in coordinating with cross-functional teams. Leslie asked about his experience with agile methodologies, and Colton provided a textbook answer that hit all the right buzzwords without saying much of substance. I let my teammates lead the questioning while I observed his body language and manner. He was clearly intelligent and well-prepared, but there was something performative about his responses, like he was playing a role rather than having a conversation. Jordan asked a technical question about handling database optimization, and Colton's answer revealed solid theoretical knowledge, but limited practical application. When Leslie inquired about his experience with conflict resolution in team settings, Colton described a situation where he'd convinced everyone his solution was correct. Not compromise or collaboration, just convincing others he was right. I noticed he used the word I significantly more than we or us when describing team projects, which raised a small red flag about his collaborative skills. 30 minutes into the interview, I asked my first question, deliberately keeping my tone neutral and professional. I wanted to know about a time when he'd made a significant mistake in his code and how he'd handled it. Colton hesitated for the first time, his confident facade cracking slightly as he searched for an acceptable answer. He eventually described a minor syntax error that had delayed a deployment by a few hours, framing it as a learning experience about the importance of thorough testing. But the story felt sanitized, like he'd chosen the smallest possible mistake to discuss. I pressed further, asking about a time when a mistake had actual consequences, when something he built had failed in production. His discomfort grew visible as he tried to deflect, suggesting that his rigorous development process meant he rarely made significant errors. That answer told me more than any resume ever could, because the best developers I knew were intimately familiar with their failures and what they'd learned from them. Jordan asked about his reason for leaving Meridian Financial, and Colton's answer involved seeking new challenges and growth opportunities, but something about his phrasing suggested he was leaving under pressure rather than choice. Leslie picked up on it too, asking follow-up questions about his timeline and what specifically he hoped to find in his next role. Colton's responses became more vague, mentioning culture fit and wanting to work with cutting-edge technology, generic answers that could apply to any job opening. I decided to shift gears and asked him to describe his ideal team environment and what kind of co-workers he worked best with. His answer revealed everything I needed to know about why he wouldn't fit at NextForge. He described wanting colleagues who respected expertise and deferred to experience, who understood that some people's opinions carried more weight due to their proven track record. The way he said it implied a hierarchy with himself at the top, and I caught Jordan's subtle eyebrow raise at the phrasing. We moved into the technical assessment portion, where I presented a coding challenge we gave all candidates. It was designed to test both technical skill and problem-solving approach, with multiple valid solutions depending on priorities. Colton approached it confidently, immediately declaring he knew the optimal solution and beginning to code. But 15 minutes in, he hit a logical error in his approach and became visibly frustrated. Instead of backing up and reconsidering his method, he tried to force his original solution to work through increasingly complex workarounds. Jordan offered a gentle suggestion about alternative approaches, and Colton dismissed it almost immediately with a condescending explanation of why his way was superior. The problem was, his way wasn't working, and he was too committed to the path to pivot. By the time our hour was up, he had a partially functional solution that was overcomplicated and brittle, when a simpler approach would have solved it completely. I thanked him for his time and explained we'd be in touch within a few days with our decision, standard interview closing procedure. Colton stood and shook hands again, and as he reached me last, he leaned in slightly and spoke in a low voice meant just for me. He said he hoped Friday night wouldn't affect my professional judgment, that we all make mistakes at parties. The implication was clear. He was framing the drink spilling as a mutual mistake, something we'd both participated in, rather than something he'd done to me. I smiled politely and assured him our decision would be based entirely on qualifications and culture fit, which was absolutely true. After he left, Jordan immediately asked if anyone else thought that was weird, and Leslie agreed something had felt off about his whole presentation. I debated whether to mention the rooftop incident and decided transparency was better than keeping secrets that might affect our hiring decision. When I explained what happened Friday night, Jordan's mouth fell open and Leslie actually laughed in disbelief. Both agreed it was relevant to culture fit, especially given how he'd handled the technical challenge and talked about teamwork. We still had 2 more candidates to interview that afternoon, but Colton had effectively eliminated himself through both his professional performance and his personal behavior. The second candidate, Priya, arrived with a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with Colton's bravado. She asked thoughtful questions about our development process and current challenges, treating the interview as a two-way conversation rather than a performance. Her technical assessment was methodical and adaptive, and when she hit an obstacle, she explained her thinking process and asked clarifying questions. The difference was stark, and by the end of her interview, all 3 of us were leaning toward an offer. Our third candidate was solid but not exceptional, and we ended the day fairly certain Priya was our choice. I spent the evening drafting rejection emails for unsuccessful candidates, including Colton's. The template was professional and standard, thanking him for his time and interest, but explaining we'd decided to move forward with another candidate whose qualifications better matched our needs. I hit send Wednesday morning after confirming Priya's offer acceptance, closing the loop on our 3-month search. I expected that to be the end of my interaction with Colton Hastings, but I should have known better. Thursday afternoon, my work email received a lengthy message from Colton expressing his disappointment with our decision. The tone started professional, but quickly devolved into accusations that I'd let personal bias influence a business decision. He suggested my judgment had been clouded by our encounter at the party, which he again characterized as a mutual mishap rather than his deliberate humiliation of a stranger. The email concluded with a thinly veiled threat about his connections in the tech industry and how word spreads about companies that don't hire fairly. I forwarded the email to our HR director, Natasha, who read it twice before calling me into her office. She asked for the full story, so I explained both the rooftop incident and the interview performance, emphasizing that my decision had been based entirely on professional criteria. Natasha agreed the email was inappropriate and advised me to document everything, then asked if I'd involved my interview teammates in the decision. When I confirmed Jordan and Leslie had both agreed Priya was the stronger candidate, she nodded and said we'd done everything correctly. She drafted a brief response to Colton stating our hiring decisions were made collaboratively based on qualifications and that further correspondence on the matter wouldn't be necessary. I thought that would close the issue, but Colton wasn't finished. That Friday, a scathing review appeared on Glassdoor, claiming NextForge had a toxic interview culture and that hiring managers made decisions based on personal vendettas. The review didn't name me specifically, but contained enough detail that anyone reading carefully could connect it to recent interviews. Natasha flagged it immediately and contacted Glassdoor's fraud department, explaining we had documentation of harassment from a rejected candidate. The review was removed within 48 hours, but not before it had garnered attention in local tech circles. My phone started getting messages from former colleagues asking what was happening at NextForge, and I spent an uncomfortable weekend explaining the situation to people I respected. Caitlin suggested I post my own account of the rooftop party to counter his narrative, but I resisted getting into a public back and forth. The problem solved itself in an unexpected way. One of Colton's former colleagues at Meridian Financial reached out to me directly through LinkedIn with a warning about his behavior. She explained that Colton had been asked to leave Meridian after multiple complaints about his treatment of junior developers and his refusal to accept code review feedback. He had a pattern of blaming others for his mistakes and creating hostile work environments for anyone he perceived as beneath him. She'd seen the Glassdoor review and wanted to make sure I knew his history before he damaged my reputation. I thanked her for the information and asked if she'd be willing to speak with our HR director. She agreed, and her conversation with Natasha provided valuable context about Colton's professional history. Natasha suggested we might need to take action if Colton continued his harassment campaign, and she started documenting everything in case legal intervention became necessary. The following Monday brought a new development when Colton's LinkedIn profile suddenly listed him as a senior developer at a startup I'd never heard of. The company's website was bare bones with stock photos and generic descriptions, the kind of fake business someone creates to make their resume look current. Jordan discovered through mutual connections that the startup didn't actually exist, just a shell website Colton had created to avoid showing unemployment. That level of deception reinforced how right we'd been to reject him, but it also suggested someone increasingly desperate and unpredictable. The harassment escalated when anonymous emails started arriving at our general company inbox, asking questions about our hiring practices and making vague allegations about discrimination. Natasha traced the emails to a disposable email service and couldn't definitively prove they came from Colton, but the timing and content made it obvious. She consulted with our legal team about sending a cease and desist letter, and they agreed we had sufficient grounds based on the pattern of behavior. The letter went out Wednesday morning, formally demanding Colton stop all contact with NextForge employees and cease making false statements about our company. For 2 days, nothing happened, and I hoped the legal letter had scared him into backing off. Then Friday evening, I received a friend request on my personal social media from an account with no profile picture. I almost ignored it, but something made me check the sparse profile information, and I realized it was Colton using a fake name. The audacity was staggering. He'd been legally warned to stop contact and responded by trying to access my personal accounts. I screenshot the request and sent it to Natasha, who forwarded everything to our attorney. This was now clear harassment with documentation, and our lawyer sent a stronger letter warning of legal action if contact continued. That finally seemed to work, because the requests and emails stopped abruptly, but I remained cautious, checking my various accounts regularly for signs of further intrusion. Priya started her first day at NextForge the following Monday, and watching her integrate smoothly with the team confirmed we'd made the right choice. She brought both technical skill and emotional intelligence, asking good questions and listening carefully to answers. The contrast with Colton couldn't have been sharper, and I felt grateful that his rooftop behavior had revealed his character before we'd made a terrible hiring mistake. Jordan pulled me aside after Priya's first week and said he'd done some checking with contacts at other companies. Apparently, Colton had a reputation in local tech circles as someone who interviewed well but caused problems once hired, burning through positions every 12 to 18 months before companies found reasons to let him go. 3 weeks after the cease and desist letter, Caitlin called me with news she'd heard through the party venue's staff network. Colton had been banned from the rooftop location after multiple complaints about his behavior toward service workers, including an incident where he'd berated a bartender for making his drink wrong. The venue had been building a file on him for months, before finally deciding he wasn't worth the trouble, regardless of how much he spent. Apparently, I wasn't his first peasant, just his most recent. The validation that his character issues extended beyond our interaction was simultaneously satisfying and sad. 6 months later, I ran into the former Meridian colleague who'd warned me about Colton. She was at a tech industry mixer, and we spent a few minutes catching up. She mentioned that Colton had finally found a job at a small company desperate enough to overlook his reputation, but that he was already causing problems with his new coworkers. Some people never learn from their mistakes because they never acknowledge making them in the first place. Priya thrived at NextForge, quickly becoming one of our strongest developers and a mentor to junior team members. Her success vindicated our hiring process and reminded me why culture fit matters as much as technical skill. A brilliant developer who destroys team morale ultimately costs more than they contribute, while someone with solid skills and genuine collaboration ability elevates everyone around them. The entire experience taught me to trust my instincts about character and to remember that how people treat strangers in casual settings reveals their true nature. Colton showed me exactly who he was on that rooftop, and I was fortunate enough to recognize it before making a costly mistake. The tech industry is small enough that reputations eventually catch up with people, and word had spread about both his interview behavior and his subsequent harassment. I heard through various channels that other companies had flagged him as a risky hire, creating a self-fulfilling cycle where his inability to find good positions made him more desperate and hostile. 2 years after the initial incident, I was promoted to Director of Engineering at NextForge, partially due to our department's success in building a strong collaborative team. Priya had advanced to lead developer, and we'd hired 3 more people who fit our culture perfectly. I sometimes wondered what happened to Colton, whether he ever gained self-awareness about why his career had stalled, but mostly, I just felt grateful for the bullet we'd dodged. The rooftop party incident had seemed like simple rudeness at the time, but it turned out to be an early warning system that saved us from months of workplace problems. Caitlin still brought up the peasant comment occasionally when we needed a good laugh about entitled behavior, and it had become shorthand in our friend group for people who reveal their character through casual cruelty. The story also served as a useful reminder in my hiring role that interviews aren't just about assessing candidates, but also about letting candidates reveal who they really are when given enough space. I established a new practice of asking all candidates about their worst professional failure and how they handled it, finding that their comfort level with discussing mistakes revealed more than any success story. The question reliably separated people who'd actually grown from experience and those who simply blamed others or minimized their role in problems. Colton's inability to discuss real failure had been a red flag I'd almost dismissed, but it connected directly to his broader pattern of refusing accountability. Years of hiring taught me that technical skills are trainable, but character flaws are usually permanent, and that the best favor you can do for your team is to be ruthless about culture fit during recruitment. Every person you bring into an organization affects everyone already there, and one toxic personality can undermine years of careful team building. The cost of leaving a position unfilled for another month is trivial compared to the cost of filling it with someone who damages your culture. Looking back, I'm grateful Colton spilled his drink on me that Friday night. Without that preview of his character, I might have been swayed by his polished interview performance and impressive resume, making a hire that would have created months of problems for my team. The universe sometimes provides clarity in unexpected ways, and a moment of casual cruelty gave me the context I needed to properly evaluate someone's professional behavior. I learned to never discount how people treat service workers, strangers, or anyone they perceive as beneath them, because that's who they really are when the professional mask comes off. Colton probably never understood why his career kept stalling, why companies seemed excited to hire him, but quickly soured on his presence. But the pattern was clear to anyone watching. His contempt for others and inability to collaborate made him toxic, regardless of his technical abilities. The experience also reinforced why I valued diverse interview panels with different perspectives. Jordan and Leslie both picked up on Colton's concerning behaviors independently, providing confidence that our assessment was sound rather than personally biased. If I'd been making the decision alone, I might have second-guessed myself or worried that Friday night had unfairly prejudiced me. But having my colleagues reach the same conclusions based purely on his interview performance validated that character issues show up in multiple contexts. 3 years after dodging that bullet, NextForge had one of the lowest turnover rates in our industry and consistently high employee satisfaction scores. We'd built something special through careful attention to culture and values, and protecting that culture meant having the courage to reject candidates who might undermine it. Colton's resume probably looked impressive to recruiters at other companies, but we'd learned to look beyond credentials to the person behind them. I never saw him again after that Monday interview, though I occasionally heard updates through industry contacts about his continued job hopping and reputation problems. Some people are their own worst enemies, sabotaging every opportunity through behaviors they refuse to examine or change. I felt no particular satisfaction in his struggles, just relief that NextForge had been spared the disruption he brought to every workplace, and deep gratitude for that Friday night rooftop party where someone showed me exactly who they were, saving me from a mistake I might have regretted for years. Sometimes the universe sends you a warning if you're paying attention, and I'm glad I recognized mine before it was too late. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.